In the annals of history, few encounters are as captivating as the clash between Rome and Greece. On one side stood Greece, the birthplace of philosophy, democracy, and legendary warriors like Alexander's successors. On the other side rose Rome, a city-state that had grown into a disciplined and relentless force, carving its empire through determination and steel. The collision of these two civilizations was not just a contest of armies but of ideas, cultures, and destinies. Rome looked to Greece with both admiration and ambition. To the Romans, Greek cities were treasures of knowledge and art, yet also territories to be subdued. The wars that followed were not sudden, but the result of years of shifting alliances, betrayals, and calculated campaigns. From the hills of Macedonia to the battlefields of Corinth, Rome's legions met Greece's once proud armies in a struggle that would decide the balance of power in the ancient Mediterranean. But the story of how Rome conquered Greece is not one of brute force alone. It is also a story of irony. For while Rome's legions shattered Greece's independence, the Greeks, in turn, conquered the Romans with their culture. Greek philosophy, literature, art, and even religion seeped into Roman life, reshaping the empire that had claimed victory. In conquering Greece, Rome had unknowingly embraced its greatest teacher. This is the story of ambition and downfall, of pride and pragmatism, of how a rising empire from the west subdued the heirs of Alexander, and yet found itself forever transformed by the very people it conquered. The unexpected rivalry between Rome and Greece was one of those turning points in history that few could have predicted. For centuries, Greece had been the heart of the ancient world. It was the land where philosophy was born, where democracy first took root, and where warriors like Leonidas and Alexander had carved legends into stone. Greek culture had spread far and wide, leaving its imprint from the sands of Egypt to the mountains of India. For many, Greece was not just a country, but the pinnacle of civilization itself. Rome, by contrast, began as little more than a city-state on the banks of the Tiber River, one among many powers competing for survival on the Italian peninsula. To imagine that this rising power from the west would one day subdue Greece was unthinkable, yet history has a way of turning the improbable into reality. The rivalry did not begin with open hostility but with suspicion and calculation. The Romans admired much about the Greeks, their literature, their art, their philosophy, but admiration did not blind them to opportunity. The Greek world by the 3rd century BCE was no longer the unified powerhouse it had once been under Alexander the Great. His empire had shattered upon his death, leaving behind a patchwork of Hellenistic kingdoms, each ruled by ambitious successors who often fought one another more fiercely than they resisted outside threats. Rome, meanwhile, was expanding steadily, its legions disciplined and its ambitions sharpened by every war fought in Italy and beyond. Where the Greeks saw glory and culture, the Romans saw strategy and power. The rivalry intensified not because Rome actively sought to crush Greece at first, but because circumstances pulled them into Greek affairs. As the Hellenistic kingdoms squabbled, some sought Rome's aid against their rivals, not realizing that inviting Rome into their disputes was like opening the gates to a power that never left. To the Romans, Greece represented not just a land of beauty and knowledge, but a stage where they could prove themselves against the heirs of Alexander. And for a people who defined themselves through conquest, the temptation was irresistible. This unexpected clash was not simply about land or wealth. It was about legitimacy. Greece had long been seen as the center of the civilized world, but Rome was rising with an unshakable sense of destiny. The two civilizations could not coexist as equals. One would inevitably dominate the other. To the Greeks, the Romans may have seemed crude and unrefined compared to their centuries of cultural achievement, but the Romans brought something Greece lacked at this stage of its history: unity, discipline, and relentless ambition. Thus, what began as distant admiration evolved into a rivalry that would reshape the Mediterranean. The heirs of Alexander stood on one side, proud of their legacy yet divided by ambition. On the other, Rome marched steadily forward, its legions unyielding, its leaders calculating, its people convinced that they were destined for greatness. Few in Greece could have imagined that this rising force from Italy would one day decide their fate, but the storm was already gathering, and the rivalry that would end Greece's independence had begun. The wars between Rome and Greece did not erupt overnight. They were the result of decades of entanglement, alliances, betrayals, and calculated moves that gradually drew the two civilizations into open conflict. The first significant spark came during Rome's wars with Macedonia, a kingdom that had once stood proudly at the center of Alexander the Great's empire. By the 3rd century BCE, Macedonia was still a formidable power, but it was no longer the unstoppable force it had been under Alexander. Rome, fresh from victories over Carthage in the Punic Wars, turned its eyes eastward, and the clash of interests was inevitable. The First Macedonian War began during the chaos of Rome's struggle with Hannibal. Philip V of Macedon sought to take advantage of Rome's distraction, allying with Carthage and threatening to extend Macedonian power deeper into Greece. But the Romans, even while fighting for their survival in Italy, were not blind to danger abroad. The war was indecisive, more a contest of maneuver than a decisive showdown, but it marked the beginning of Roman involvement in Greek affairs. For Greece, Rome was no longer a distant observer, it was now a player in their world. The Second Macedonian War proved far more consequential. This time Rome presented itself as the liberator of Greece, claiming to champion the independence of the Greek city-states against Macedonian domination. Many Greeks, weary of Macedonian control and seduced by the promise of freedom, welcomed Roman intervention. The decisive moment came at the Battle of Cynocephalae in 197 BCE, where Roman legions clashed with the Macedonian phalanx. The outcome shocked the ancient world. The phalanx, once the unbeatable formation that had carried Alexander to the ends of the earth, crumbled before the flexibility and discipline of Rome's manipular legions. It was more than just a victory. It was a statement that the balance of power had shifted. Rome's proclamation of Greek freedom at the Isthmian Games in 196 BCE was greeted with jubilation, but beneath the surface, it was a carefully calculated move. By presenting itself as a protector rather than a conqueror, Rome gained influence without the immediate burdens of direct rule. Yet, as history would show, Rome rarely intervened without eventually tightening its grip. The Greeks soon realized that Roman freedom came with strings attached. The Third Macedonian War followed soon after, as Philip's son, Perseus, attempted to restore Macedonian strength. Once again, the legions of Rome marched east, and once again, they proved irresistible. At the Battle of Pydna in 168 BCE, the phalanx met the legion on the field. And once more, the rigid Greek formation was undone by Rome's tactical superiority. The fall of Perseus marked the effective end of Macedonia as a great power, and with it, a major chapter of Greek independence closed. These wars were not just military contests, they were the unraveling of Greek autonomy. Each Roman victory chipped away at the independence of the Hellenistic kingdoms, binding them closer to Rome's orbit. What began as a war of liberation had turned into a slow but steady process of domination. The Greeks had invited Rome in as an ally, but they were beginning to realize that Rome was unlike any ally they had ever known, an ally who, once entrenched, never left. The conquest of Greece was not achieved in a single stroke, but through a steady process of campaigns, settlements, and political maneuvers that slowly tightened Rome's grip. After the Macedonian Wars, the once proud kingdoms and city-states of Greece found themselves living under the shadow of a new master. Rome, though careful to present itself as a liberator, gradually revealed its true nature as the arbiter of Greek affairs. Every dispute, every conflict between rival factions, became an opportunity for Rome to intervene, and with each intervention, the autonomy of Greece slipped further away. The most decisive moment in this gradual conquest came with the war against the Achaean League, a confederation of city-states that resisted Roman interference. Their resistance was brave but tragically doomed. In 146 BCE, the Roman general Lucius Mummius marched against the city of Corinth, one of the jewels of Greece. The battle was swift, and the aftermath was brutal. Corinth was not merely defeated, it was annihilated. Its men were slaughtered, its women and children sold into slavery, and the city itself set aflame. The destruction of Corinth sent a chilling message to the rest of Greece. Defiance against Rome would be met with utter ruin. That same year, Rome had also destroyed Carthage, its greatest rival in the West in the Third Punic War. The timing was no accident. The simultaneous destruction of Carthage and Corinth symbolized Rome's emergence as the supreme power across both the Western and Eastern Mediterranean. Greece, the land that had given the world democracy, philosophy, and art, now lay subdued. What had begun as Roman promises of freedom ended in ashes and chains. Yet the conquest was not only military. Rome's strategy was as much about politics and assimilation as it was about war. The Greeks were fractured, divided by local rivalries, and Rome exploited this weakness masterfully. By siding with one city-state against another, by presenting itself as the guarantor of order, Rome positioned itself as indispensable. Greek leaders who sought advantage in their internal struggles often invited Rome to intervene, unaware that each request only deepened Rome's control. Slowly, Greece ceased to act as an independent collection of states and became instead a province of a greater empire. And yet, for all the harshness of conquest, Rome could not escape the allure of Greek culture. Greek art, literature, and philosophy captivated Roman elites. The victors became the admirers of the vanquished, adopting Greek gods, studying Greek thought, and decorating their villas with Greek sculpture. In this way, Greece lost its political independence but conquered Rome in culture. This paradox became one of history's great ironies. The empire that subjugated Greece was itself transformed by Greek influence, ensuring that the legacy of Athens and Sparta would echo through the Roman world. The fall of Corinth marked the end of Greece's independence, but it was also the beginning of a new chapter where Greek culture lived on, carried forward by the very power that had conquered it. Rome ruled with an iron fist, but in its heart, it carried the spirit of Greece. The legions had triumphed, but it was Greek thought, art, and philosophy that would shape the soul of the empire for centuries to come.